Welcome to this complete, comprehensive explainer on ASC 330. Today, we're diving deep into the definitive guide on exactly how inventory is recognized, costed, and reported under US GAAP. Now, if you deal with balance sheets on any level, you already know that inventory is very often one of the absolute largest assets sitting on the books. But because of that, it's also one of the most highly scrutinized areas by auditors, regulators, and investors alike. And why is that? Well, because getting it wrong doesn't just skew your balance sheet in a vacuum. It creates a massive domino effect that cascades directly into your profit margins, your tax liabilities, and ultimately investor confidence. By the end of this capstone session, you're going to have a rock-solid end-to-end understanding of the strict rules that govern the literal life cycle of an inventory item. We're going to trace that journey from the very moment it hits your loading dock all the way to the precise moment it's finalized and reported on the financial statements. So, here is the roadmap for our journey today. We'll be breaking this entire process down into 6 logical stages. We're going to start right at the beginning with fundamentals and scope, move right into recognition rules, and then decode exactly how to measure true cost. After that, we'll tackle the big ones, costing methods and LCNRV, before diving into the actual journal entries. Finally, we'll wrap the whole thing up with presentation and controls. Think of this as the complete chronological life cycle of a product. Let's jump right in. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Inventory Fundamentals and Scope. We really need to ground ourselves here, because getting this core concept right on day one prevents massive, cascading accounting errors later down the line. Okay, so the single most important rule of ASC 330, the foundational idea you really have to wrap your head around, is understanding inventory as a flow concept. This whole system is deeply, deeply rooted in the matching principle of GAAP. Here's how it works in practice. We hold inventory firmly on the balance sheet as an asset across its various stages of life. And that means whether it's raw materials waiting in a bin, work in process actively on the assembly line, or fully finished goods waiting in the warehouse, it lives on the balance sheet. And we do this specifically to match the expense of creating that good with the revenue it eventually generates. It only becomes an expense, specifically cost of goods sold or COGS, when it is finally sold to a customer or officially written off. Listen, if you go out, buy a bunch of inventory, and expense it immediately upon purchase, you are fundamentally violating the core of modern accounting. By doing that, you're artificially depressing your current period income, making your company look less profitable than it is, and you're completely ignoring the future economic benefit that's quite literally just sitting there in your warehouse. You absolutely have to follow the flow. But that begs a pretty big question. What exactly counts as inventory in the first place? Well, it's all about the business purpose. By definition, inventory consists of assets held for sale in the ordinary course of business or items that are going to be consumed to produce those goods. The physical nature of the actual asset doesn't really matter. The intent behind owning it is everything. For example, if you buy a massive multi-million-dollar manufacturing machine to make goods, that machine is property, plant, and equipment because its purpose is for internal, long-term use. But if a property developer builds a brand new house specifically with the intention to sell it to a family, that entire house is classified as inventory. Consider a car at a dealership. A shiny new car sitting on the front lot with a window sticker is inventory. But if you take that exact same car, slap a courtesy shuttle sticker on the side of it, and hand the keys over to the service department to drive customers around, boom, it suddenly becomes a fixed asset. It's the exact same physical object, but it requires an entirely different accounting treatment based entirely on its business purpose. All right, let's move into Section 2 and see how this flow builds. We know what inventory is now, but exactly when does it legally hit our books at period end? To figure that out, we need to head down to the loading dock. You see, the physical receipt date of a box is not necessarily the official accounting date. It all comes down to the legally binding shipping terms. Imagine it's December 31st. Year-end close is looming, and a massive blizzard completely halts a delivery truck halfway between your supplier and your warehouse. If your shipping terms were negotiated as FOB shipping point, well, the buyer, that's you, owns the goods the very moment they leave the seller's warehouse. That means you must record that frozen inventory on your balance sheet tonight, along with an account payable, even though you realistically won't physically see those boxes until maybe January 3rd. It's a bit like obsessively tracking an Amazon package, except your auditor's watching right over your shoulder to make sure you book it. Conversely, if your terms are FOB destination, ownership doesn't transfer until those goods physically arrive, back up, and cross your delivery dock. Until then, it's the seller's problem. So, the absolutely crucial point to remember here is this golden rule. Who bears the risk of loss? If that delivery truck crashes and burns on the highway, whose insurance is legally required to pay for it? The party bearing that ultimate risk is the party who owns the goods on their balance sheet. And this logic applies heavily to consignment arrangements too. Think of an independent artist displaying their paintings in a local gallery. The gallery doesn't actually own the art.
If the gallery suddenly goes bankrupt, their creditors cannot seize those paintings to pay off debts, because the artist still bears the risk of loss. The goods stay firmly and safely on the artist's books, not the gallery's, until a customer actually walks in, points at a painting, and buys it. Now that we know exactly when we legally own the inventory, let's step into Section 3. We're moving from the loading dock directly into the warehouse and the factory floor to figure out exactly what costs are allowed to be capitalized into the product itself. For merchandise companies, those buying finished goods to resell, the strict GAAP rule is that you capitalize all costs required to bring the inventory to its present location and condition for sale. This naturally includes the raw purchase price and any import duties, but crucially, it also includes freight in. This is the cost of shipping the goods to your warehouse. Now, why do companies get this wrong so often? Well, expensing freight in incorrectly is a massive error that completely tanks your current period profitability. If you capitalize it properly as an inventory asset, you spread that cost out, deferring the expense until the goods are actually sold later. Freight out, however, which is the cost of shipping the final goods to your end customer, is an entirely different beast. That is a selling expense incurred after the product is fully ready and sold. If you mix these up and expense freight in instead of capitalizing it, you are illegally understating your assets and artificially overstating your current period expenses. Now, for manufacturing companies, the cost build gets quite a bit more involved. Let's deliberately walk through our running chair manufacturer example to see how this comes together in the real world. To find the true capitalizable cost of a finished chair, we have to build it up step by step. Let's say we use $50 in direct materials per chair. That's the raw wood, the fabric, the screws. Then we add $30 in direct labor, which directly represents the hourly wages of the assembly line workers physically building it. Finally, we must add manufacturing overhead. Let's say we allocate $20 per chair to cover all those indirect factory costs, things like the depreciation on the assembly machines, the factory's monthly utility bills, or the floor supervisor's salary. All three of these buckets combine $50 plus $30 plus $20, meaning every single finished chair rolls off the line and hits your balance sheet accurately valued at exactly $100. And this precise build brings us to a very strict US GAAP requirement: full absorption costing. You must include all manufacturing costs in your inventory asset, and yes, that absolutely includes fixed manufacturing overhead like that factory rent or supervisor's salary we just discussed. Now, I know variable costing is incredibly tempting for internal management. Managers love to see the immediate cash impact of fixed overhead, so they might want to just expense it all immediately on their internal performance reports. But for your external balance sheet, both the IRS and US GAAP absolutely forbid this practice. Why? Because it completely violates the matching principle. You must absorb those fixed overhead costs into the inventory itself, carrying them as an asset until the specific item is sold. Okay, so the chairs are fully built, their costs are perfectly and legally allocated, and they are safely sitting in the warehouse. Let's explore Section 4 to see how we systematically assign value to them as they wait for buyers. Companies must choose a specific costing method to decide which specific costs move over to COGS and which costs stay behind in ending inventory. FIFO, or first in, first out, assumes the oldest costs are sold first. LIFO, or last in, first out, assumes the newest costs are sold first. Now, LIFO can provide a massive tax advantage during times of high inflation because it matches newer, higher costs against current revenue, lowering taxable income. And while US GAAP allows LIFO, it's definitely worth noting that international standards under IFRS actually ban it outright. Finally, there's weighted average, which just smoothly blends all costs together. But here's the underlying brilliance of the accounting math. Regardless of whether you choose FIFO, LIFO, or weighted average, the math must always balance. Your cost of goods sold plus your ending inventory will always perfectly equal your total cost of goods available for sale. It is a completely closed loop. But what happens if the market price of our inventory suddenly plummets or goods get damaged while sitting on the shelf? Enter the lower of cost or net realizable value, or LCNRV test. Imagine you have a warehouse packed full of last year's smartphones. The very day the new model is announced by the manufacturer, the market value of your existing inventory plummets. You simply can't sell them for your original cost anymore. The LCNRV rule forces you to face the music and take the economic loss immediately. Step 1, calculate your original cost. Step 2, calculate your net realizable value, which is just the estimated selling price minus any cost required to complete and sell the item. Step 3, if that NRV is lower than your historical cost, you must write the inventory down to the NRV and recognize an expense on the income statement right then and there. But step 4, if NRV is higher than your cost, you do absolutely nothing. You keep it safely recorded at historical cost. Now, hear this loud and clear. Under US GAAP, inventory write-downs are permanent. This connects directly back to the conservatism principle in accounting. GAAP prefers that you anticipate and record your losses immediately, but it strictly demands that you never anticipate gains until they are actually realized through a sale. So let's say those obsolete smartphones suddenly become retro-chic collector's items next year, and market prices surge back past your original cost. Guess what? You cannot reverse the previous write-down. Once written down, it stays down forever. Period.
Let's transition away from the warehouse and head over to the accountant's desk for Section 5 to execute the actual financial reporting of a sale. Okay, let's really dive into this, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Recording an inventory sale actually requires two distinct journal entries. Entry 1, you debit accounts receivable and credit revenue to record the money you are legally owed by the customer. But Entry 2 is just as critical. You must debit cost of goods sold and credit inventory to physically remove the value of the item from your warehouse books. It is a strict duality. If you just excitedly book the revenue and forget Entry 2, you now have ghost inventory sitting on your balance sheet. And worse, your net income looks artificially massive because you haven't recorded the associated expense of the item you just gave away. It is a fast track to an audit failure. Both entries are absolutely required every single time a sale occurs. Of course, those journal entries only matter if your book records actually match physical reality, and that's exactly why we do physical counts. A full physical count usually happens right at year end, stopping all warehouse operations to literally count every single item at once. Cycle counting, on the other hand, is a continuous, rolling schedule where you count small portions of inventory throughout the year. Massive retailers like Amazon or Walmart rely almost entirely on cycle counting because shutting down a mega warehouse for a week to count boxes would cost them millions in lost sales. It's a bit like checking your fridge inventory one shelf at a time instead of emptying the whole kitchen. But here is the kicker. Regardless of the method, if you find significant discrepancies, meaning overages or shortages, you cannot just blindly post an adjusting entry to fix the spreadsheet. You must investigate the root cause for theft, damage, or recording errors first. We've reached the final stage. Section 6 wraps up our complete lifecycle journey with the final period end checks and the required presentation on the financial statements. Transparency is the ultimate goal when dealing with ASC 330. In the notes to the financial statements, you are legally required to explicitly disclose your chosen costing method. Why? Because investors aren't flying blind. Knowing if a company uses FIFO versus LIFO completely changes how a financial analyst interprets their profit margins, especially during times of high inflation. For manufacturers, you must show your inventory balance split cleanly into its components: raw materials, work in process, and finished goods, so readers know how close your assets are to being sellable. You also have to explicitly disclose any significant write-downs that happen during the period, along with your overall policy for testing LCNRV. To avoid audit nightmares, you really need to keep a rigorous period-end watch list. Common, highly damaging mistakes include failing to capitalize freight in, missing that crucial second COGS journal entry when a sale happens, forgetting to logically move completed work in process into the finished goods account, and skipping the mandatory LCNRV assessment. Remember our very first principle from Section 1? Inventory is a continuous flow. An error here doesn't just sit in a vacuum. Miscalculating your ending inventory breaks your cost of goods sold, which artificially breaks your gross profit, which breaks your net income, which ultimately means you might be paying the entirely wrong amount of taxes to the government. Strict period-end controls around these flows are simply non-negotiable. Which leaves us with the ultimate capstone summary for this entire standard. From the moment you take legal ownership on the snowy loading dock, to correctly capitalizing your freight in, properly absorbing your factory overhead, rigorously testing your shelves for LCNRV, and finally booking that dual COGS entry, every single step matters. Understanding ASC 330 isn't just about balancing a spreadsheet, it's about accurately capturing the true economic engine of a business. So ask yourself, do your period end records truly reflect the physical reality and the honest economic value of your inventory? Take these standards, apply them rigorously to your ledgers, and ensure your inventory flow is absolutely bulletproof. Thanks for joining me on this comprehensive explainer, and keep learning.